Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Christina Langell. With me today is Pennsylvania editor Kristen Smith. Kristen, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. So today we're going to talk about Pennsylvania primaries and how they work. So we actually have some coming up in May. And tell us who votes in them.
So right now, there's only two groups of voters that get to vote in our primaries, and that's registered Democrats and registered Republicans. And Pennsylvania is one of 14 states that does it this way. And there's a lot of advocates and apparently even voters who say that it's time to change this. Independents are a significant block, 1.4 million registered voters in Pennsylvania. And they argue that their feelings about it are just as important as Republicans and Democrats who are registered. There's a lot of extenuating factors for why people may identify as unaffiliated in their registration and personal reasons too, right? So, and I think we're seeing that in this more polarized political environment that the number of independents are growing. And so there's a lot of voters who want to be able to have that representation. And according to a poll from Pennsylvania Voters First, something like more than 2/3 of voters are saying, hey, let's have open primaries. Let's let all the voters weigh in and make a choice here. I think that is something that would bring a more balanced winner to the situation, given that when you have closed primaries, as we do now, there tends to be the ability for more radical candidates to easily win a primary, but then struggle on a statewide level because the primaries do not capture the full breadth of what the voting public really feels and supports. In a place like Pennsylvania, that's crucial because of how purple we've become and how critical we've become in national politics lately. And so this isn't even just like on a presidential level or even a governor. Although it is worth noting that Senator Mastriano, when he ran for governor back in 2022 against Josh Shapiro, that phenomenon was considered part of why he struggled statewide, is that because in a primary, he was very much able to court a very specific set of voters that were going to back him. But when he pulled back to statewide, he struggled to attract moderates and unaffiliated voters. But like I said, smaller races are particularly a problem. 95% of our House seats last year were non-competitive, and they were decided during primaries. And 81% of races during the general election had no candidate at all. Nationally, we are 46th out of 50 nationwide for the efficacy of the way our primary process works. So, essentially what this means is that people are able to pick a party, run unopposed. It's a guaranteed election, and because you don't have the voice of independents weighing in, the ability for seats to shift or for Democrat or demographics to switch to better represent the voting public is a lot harder in Pennsylvania as opposed to a system that was more open.
Yeah, I've actually known people in Pennsylvania who have registered in the opposite party to what they are, just so that they could try to moderate a little bit the candidates that were coming out of that party by being able to vote in a primary, because they weren't concerned about who candidates were being put up on one side, but were more concerned about the other. Can you describe, I know in the article two different types of open primaries were discussed. One was kind of midway between what we have and a fully open primary, and one was a fully open primary.
So a fully open primary is the very basic concept of you can vote for anyone you want. It doesn't matter what party they are, you can go and pick. And that, I think, is something that is the concept that is more, when we look at this research and this data, I think that's the concept that when voters are responding to this issue, that's what they're thinking of. But then there's also a midway version, like you said, that are semi-open. So you would have to choose, as an unaffiliated voter, you would have to choose to either vote in the Republican primary or the Democrat primary. So that's a little bit more narrow and tailored. But again, that doesn't require a voter to change their affiliation or to say if they felt strongly against a candidate, they wouldn't have to register again, for that party and then unregistered, it would just be it'd be a lot easier, a lot more straightforward than what we have happening now. And again, it would be easier to understand voting trends and voting patterns. We saw a lot of party switching in the gubernatorial election in 2022, for example. There was a lot of schools of thought. One of them was that people were transitioning more to the Republican Party. And again, we've seen that happen nationally, we'll set that aside just because we're talking specifically about Pennsylvania. But then, as you alluded to, there was people who just simply didn't want a specific candidate, or conversely wanted to get a very radical candidate elected so that they would be very easy to defeat in a statewide election. So we don't know, because you can't ask voter. Well, you could, but nobody's going to come out and say exactly why they did it. And that data is just it's not really possible to figure out why. We can all hold our suspicions one way or the other. So in Pennsylvania, though, both of those ideas have support in the legislature. And there are bills pending that would make at least semi-open primaries possible. And it's not something that we're seeing talked about on the legislative agenda more broadly. And we've got a lot of other issues that seem to rise to the level of, taking up all of the airspace, let's just say, as far as public or legislative priorities go. That being said, there seems to be a lot of bipartisan support for it. So, it stands to reason that we could finally become, join the majority here and say, let's give independent voters a chance to vote in primaries.
Leslie, you mentioned that certain types of jobs would preclude you from being affiliated with a particular party. And the article talks about veterans and our military a lot. Would that be one of those jobs?
Absolutely. I'm not saying that every veteran is registered unaffiliated, and I think that probably most of them have picked one party or the other. However, they're in a very precarious position because in the military, they serve the administration no matter who is in charge. And so they are to be very careful about being too critical or being too outspoken while still serving of any administration, because they are to be united and to be in service to the country. And that means in service to the voters and what they have chosen to. And so for them, registering unaffiliated, which I know many military members have, that makes the most sense, because that way their personal views aren't known. They don't have to be out about it. They can uphold what their job requires of them. And that's just one example, but that's a really great example. There's 300,000 veterans or so in Pennsylvania. So that's a significant chunk of voters that would potentially be impacted by this. And they've spoken on the record about it. So that, like I said, that's just a very clear example of, a significant voting bloc that would find this useful and are restricted from voting in primaries simply because of a job requirement that they are trying to meet.
Well, thank you so much, Kristen. We will continue following this, see if it ends up on the legislative agenda this year or sometime soon. And thank you for coming. We'll see you at thecentersquare.com/Pennsylvania.